Okay. Now, when it comes to actually writing your story, after you've read a bunch of science fiction short stories and got a feel for things, the most important thing is to not try to put too much in. That's what keeps it short. So you want to focus on one person, maybe two people, as your main character or characters. It's tough to have a cast of thousands in a short story that's only 3,000 to 5,000 words. Maybe 8,000 words. If you have 1,000 characters, they only get 8 words each. That's not much. But focus on one or two major ideas. A novel can have lots and lots of different ideas packed into it, but a short story, you need to have a lot more focus. And so decide what ideas, what one idea or two ideas are really interesting. Often a short story comes from the clash of two interesting ideas. So yeah, having 2 ideas can be great for a short story. Having 15 ideas is probably too much. You have to, keep focus in terms of time. It's kind of tough to have a short story that gives you scenes in 15 or 20 different time periods. Some short stories are only a single scene. Some are I actually did write a 1,000-word short story that was 9 scenes, but those scenes were very short. Yeah, so basically, you have to limit your scope in terms of the number of things you're dealing with. You can still deal with big, epic ideas, but you have to, cut down on how fully you develop those ideas and how fully you develop, the characters. There are always trade-offs in short fiction. You can fully develop, one character at the expense of fully developing a second character, whereas in a novel you could fully develop both of them. One of the most important things is to go through your story after you have written it and cut out the stuff you don't actually need. With a novel, you have a lot of space to establish some side journeys and things like that. In the story I told you about, that I had 9 scenes in 1,000 words, it was originally a 2,000-word story that had a subplot and a couple more characters. And when I realized that I needed to cut it down under 1,000 words, because the place I was sending it to had a 1,000-word upper limit, I went through and I cut out the subplot and cut out the extra character and just focused on what I needed. Okay, here are some ways to keep a short story from becoming a long story. First, enter scenes late and leave them early, particularly conversation scenes. When people get together, hey, how you doing? Fine, how are you? How's the wife? How's the kids? All that kind of stuff. Those little introductory parts of the conversation probably aren't necessary to your plot. So cut to the point in the conversation where it really focuses on the plot. In fact, if you can cut to the point where they're already arguing over something that's important to your plot, that gives you tension right from the get-go as you move into that scene. So enter that scene as late as you can and still get across the information you need to. And then at the other end, leave that scene immediately after you've gotten across what you need to from that scene. You don't need to have people say their goodbyes and exit out the doors. there's something I find extremely useful in writing a short story is take a couple of line breaks, put a pound sign, a couple more line breaks. You're into a new scene. That's the quickest transition you can have from scene to scene. Now, second way to keep your short story from becoming a long story, trust your readers to fill in details you don't supply. Basically, this is kind of relying on the power of cliché. Now, clichés are bad in many ways, but they are also very useful. Stereotypes and clichés are kind of shortcuts in our mind that we use. So, for instance, if you have a story about someone who has rubbed a lamp and a genie has come out, you can start talking about the third wish. And everybody knows that naturally that's going to be the final wish, because you get 3 wishes, right? And so you don't need to go into an explanation in your story about how the laws of genies require that the genies can only offer 3 wishes, and the genie will try to twist your wish in some way against your will, and things like that. By relying on the stereotype and the cliche to fill in, the backstory for the reader, that allows you to keep those words off the page, but you invoke them in the reader's mind by invoking the idea that the reader is familiar with. Okay. Other tips: cut down the number of scenes, cut down the number of characters, cut down the number of subplots, reduce the complexity of the main plot. Has Brandon talked to you about try-fail cycles? Yeah. So in a novel, you can have a whole bunch of try-fail cycles as the plot gets deeper and more complex. In a short story, you can limit the number of try-fail cycles, in order to keep the story shorter. In one of my stories, I actually had I had a character who had an AI in his visor. And as they were trying to figure out solutions to this scientific problem, they would come up with an idea and the AI would say, no, that's not going to work. Providing really short try-fail cycles so that I could deal with several possibilities without having the people actually try them out to see if they would work. But yeah, shortcuts like that to reduce the complexity of the main plot allow you to keep the story short. How many of you have heard show, don't tell? Yeah. To reduce the size of a short story, sometimes you should tell rather than show. Just give the reader the information they need and continue on with the story. Now, a warning about that: don't do it too much, particularly near the beginning of the story, or an editor who's looking at it will go, oh, this writer has never heard show, don't tell, and think you aren't writing competently. But it's a technique that you can use sparingly to reduce the size of your story. And finally, I've talked about enter late, leave early in terms of a scene. You can sometimes do the same thing in terms of your story. Start the story as close to the climax of the story as possible and fill in whatever backstory is necessary during the course of the story. So